bases dropped here in Atlanta, Georgia. The bases dropped in Central Florida as well. We got a few things to talk about this morning. Soccer Down Here is live, July 30th edition. It's Tuesday Thoughts edition, so we will be taking your thoughts on Twitter at Soccer Down Here. You can let us know what you think about comments that were made at the All-Star game during All-Star Week in Orlando. Leandro Gonzalez-Perez, Ezequiel Barco spoke to the media yesterday. Had some interesting things to say. There's been lots of interesting takes about it. We'll get into all that this morning, but give us your takes on Twitter at Soccer Down Here. We'll also get into the MLS transfer window, some updates on Christian Pavón and the chase with the LA Galaxy, or maybe it is done. We will catch you up on what was said on Buenos Aires radio overnight. We'll also get into some other players that are being linked to MLS clubs. And we'll get into the whole U.S. women's national team, U.S. soccer court battle with Hope Solo waging her own battle off to the side, trying to join the battle, but she's being held off from the battle, and she's not happy about it. And it's complicated. Lots and lots of complications with that whole situation. It's going to be an interesting Tuesday Thoughts, John.
So is this Complication Tuesday?
It might be. It's all of it is very complicated, and all of it is creating lots of yelling and lots of stomping of feet on all sides. And
gnashing of teeth.
Yeah, I mean, just none of it's easy, though. Like, none of this is simple. Let's, where do you want to start? You want to go ahead and start with what's going on in Orlando right now?
Figure. Go ahead. Rock and roll.
All right. So Mike Gramajo, who has written for the Orlando Sentinel, he's written for Pro Soccer USA. He wrote a piece over at MLSsoccer.com after some interviews were done around the All-Star game, and we all remember this from last year, where everybody comes to town and there's lots of conversation about all of the news around the league. Well, there's 5 Atlanta players that are in Orlando for the All-Star game, and Leandro Gonzalez-Perez had a few things to say that made some headlines. I'm just going to read the quotes from the article, and we'll jump into it from there. Leandro said, "Things have changed a lot, the way the club has played the game, and we don't like it. We're working to return to the way it was before and how we characterized through and differentiated us apart from other teams. We're returning to that a little bit. You're seeing a new face to the club. Now we have to continue working on that to fortify that." He said, "Of course, it's hard talking about changing from Tata Martino to Frank de Boer. 2 years of playing the same way, which in return gave you results. Coming out as champions, winning the league in a deserving manner. When there was no reason to change, things changed. But we're professionals. We have to adapt to what the coach wants and what the sporting director wants and try to do things in the best possible manner because we share the same objective." Ezequiel Barco also spoke to the media. He said, "It's been challenging for us because we stopped playing a way that allowed us to play more forward. Frank came here with a plan that we're trying to get used to. We're applying it well on the field if you consider where we're at in the standings. So we have to continue adapting and trusting what the coach asks from us." Leandro continued, "It seems like the idea to attack our opponents has been put to the side, and we usually begin defending first. And for us, we don't like that. If you notice, we aren't a team that's known to play defensively, but we were a team that scored the most goals, and it made a difference during the games. The games now, we approach them playing uphill, and it's very distinct to the way we played last year, and we're not pleased with that. So it's something that we need to change to go back to feeling that same sensation when we were a team that was really strong offensively." And then when he was asked about communication between the players and the technical staff, LGP said, "Yes, there's communication, but sometimes things just aren't understood. But we're working, always thinking what's best for the team and doing things the best possible." If you can imagine, those comments made some waves, nationwide especially. Very, very complicated, I think, to dig into it, and that's what I keep coming back to. I think, and it's something that our friend Felipe Cardenas has written about a lot, really from day one, about the difference in culture. And I think that's a huge element to it. I really do. You're talking about a very different type of manager, type of technical staff than what these players had last year with Tata Martino and his staff. There is an element of that cultural aspect becoming tactical when you get into the defense and you get into being a defensive team first, which is what gets said a lot. I want to get into a couple sets of numbers because I think there's one big difference in the way this team is defending. And it's not, I don't think it's quite as obvious as you think. So, from the attacking perspective, they're tied for 5th in the league in goals. They're 8th in expected goals. They're 8th in shots per game. 9th in shots on target per game. 4th in shots inside the penalty area. One big difference this year compared to last in terms of the attack is that they're dribbling and taking players on 1v1 far more than they did in the past. They're 3rd in the league in successful dribbles. I think a lot of that is down to Pity Martinez, a different type of player than Miguel Almiron. He's getting the ball with players defending him. He's going to go for the dribble more. Ezequiel Barco going to go for the dribble more. That's one big change. The team is 6th in chances created. They're not getting as many shots inside the 6. Last year, Joseph was among the league leaders in shots inside the 6-yard box. This year, they're 21st in that. Those are some of the differences where they sit right now. On the defensive side, and this is where it jumped out to me, they're 4th in shots allowed per game. That's really good defensively. They're 4th in possession in the league. That's about where they were last year. They're last in successful tackles per game. They're 20th in interceptions. They're 23rd in fouls committed. Those numbers were much higher in the past. Not 1st, 2nd, 3rd in all of that, but much more aggressive defensively. I don't think it's in the past that this team didn't defend. I think it's the way they defended. And we've gotten some of these comments. When you get past the bluster at the beginning of the comments, I think if you go back to some of the things Pity Martinez has said, what Ezequiel Barco said here, where he said, allowed us to play more forward, and I think it was LGP who said playing uphill. That was something that jumped out to me. They're defending from a deeper position. They're not as aggressive defensively. They're more organized defensively. That's a difference, and that's something that Frank de Boer mentioned. He wanted to be more organized defensively. It is changing the way the team functions a bit, and obviously it's getting under some people's skin. Now, I guess my thing right now is this is a rough time to be talking about defending too much after the last month, where you're giving up a lot of goals. And I don't think that's because you're sitting back or you're putting too many numbers behind the ball or those types of things. The organization that you had that was working well, where you were starting to build more attacks, and you were doing that without Ezequiel Barco as well, that's kind of went away, and you're not as organized as you were in that run of games in May, late April, May, where you were getting good results and a lot of good results in a row. That organization is starting to break down, and that is a big problem. And I don't know what that's down to. I don't know if that's down to friction. I don't know if that's down to lack of concentration, the mentality that people have talked about a lot. One thing that Tata Martino mentioned a lot and players mentioned a lot during the last 2 years in terms of defense is intensity. And I think at times this team is not as intense as it needs to be. Thought it showed in that 15 minutes against LA. It's all really complicated, John, and there's not a lot of easy answers right now because you're talking about a team and a group that, for the most part, was together for 2 years with one mentality from the technical staff, and now it's a different personality altogether. It's a very different personality from the technical staff, and it's not copacetic at the moment.
And you also had a player in Miguel Almiron who's no longer here. And there's always, for me anyway, when you have a new coaching staff come in whose approach is different from what you've had in previous seasons, there's always going to be that period of adjustment. That period of adjustment was compounded by player loss, player addition, and player injuries. Then you have what happened at the beginning, of the season. Then you have the run where it was 10 of 13. And you feel, at least looking at it from the outside, that there are ideas that are sticking. And then you add into it all of the elements of schedule compression and fatigue and all these other things. And there was something else that stuck out to me in the MLS article, where goals per game in 2017-2018, identical at 2.06. Goals conceded, it was a difference year to year of a tenth of a goal per game. 2019 to date, goals conceded is less, actually, minimally, than in 2018. Goals per game is down by 20%. To me, that means the margins are closing when it comes to what we're seeing. 1.65 to 1.26, you're down from a little over 2 to where you are right now. And I think that there are all these different adjustments and all these different layers and all these different levels of things that are having to be looked at. And it's a lot of things that we have to juggle when we're discussing what we see. And you see aspects of it on a weekly basis when you're looking at the matches. And one of the comments that we've had early this morning that has stuck out to me was from Christopher Gersel. He says, and it comes from what he has been reading. He says, I put the blame for the sluggishness solely on accumulated injuries on our wings, losing Miguel Almiron and PT underperforming. Coaching matters, but even the best coach can only do so much when these little problems keep mounting. I think that defensively, it's a little bit more than just a little problem right now. But you have all of these extenuating factors that are leading into all of these discussions. And we probably could go for 3 or 4 hours in trying to break all of this stuff down. But there's a lot of stuff in play, and it's perpetually in play, and it's stuff that continually has to be addressed when you're talking about adjustments that started by losing your offensive catalyst last season.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, and I think that informs some of the tactics, and I think the injuries have definitely informed the tactics, and you've had some limitations in what you can do because of who you have not had due to injury. That's made it definitely more difficult to get any kind of momentum. It's been a problem. I want to get into a couple of quotes over the last couple of years when you talk about defense, and I didn't get a chance to pull everything I could find in terms of quotes, but there were a couple things that jumped out. Tata Martino talked about not controlling the game in RSL in April 2017 like he wanted them to, even though they won 3-1. So they were very decisive in attack. The negative is that I don't think we controlled the game for the full 90 minutes like I wanted us to. Michael Parkhurst was talking about Tata Martino in July of 2017, and he said, I think it's been a case of both sides learning each other, us learning and adapting to Tata and how he wants to do things, what he expects of us on a daily basis in games, on the field, off the field, but also him adapting to MLS and the rigors of it with travel and the heat in Atlanta and some of the restrictions and players' union issues put on him that he's probably never dealt with before. And Parkhurst said, I actually had to have a conversation with him at one point like, hey, I think we need to have a day off here. But to be fair, he's really easy to talk to. He's a good guy in that aspect, so that's good. He's got the respect of the whole team. Now, that kind of shows, that's 2017. That's as everything's coming together. Some of the challenges that Tata Martino dealt with in terms of it being a different league and a different set of rules and a different set of travel and heat and all those types of things. And Tata Martino was known at that point, and this was something that was talked about a good bit in 2017, as working the team really hard and them losing legs late in matches and that being an issue. And that was something that adapted over the 2 years that Tata Martino was here. I want to get into a couple of quotes after Atlanta won the Eastern Conference Championship last year in the playoffs. Now, I'm going to start with Tata Martino. And this is something that I've said it a few times. I don't think things would be dramatically different tactically this year if Tata Martino was here. Not talking about players being here, not talking about Miguel Almiron, but if Tata Martino was here. And one of the reasons is some of the things he said late in the year. And this is what he said after winning at Red Bull Arena. He said, in the final matches of the regular season, the team labored and gave up too many goals, and it wasn't the way we were going to have success in the playoffs. So we were going to have to opt for a style of play that we had played during the season, which was the line of 5, and it was the system that has given us the most security defensively. This has helped us be solid defensively on the road and dominant at home. Today was certainly the game we wanted to play. We know it wasn't one of the team's best performances or the most attractive, but it was a practical performance, and I do think it gives you and calmness to have a team that can adjust to different situations, because this was a game that played out that way, but didn't bring opportunities because of the superiority of the opponent. But you need to be able to play in that kind of game. That was something that you could see after the match in Toronto. You could see it, honestly, in the match at Red Bull Arena. You could see it late in the year last year where the team was giving up too many bad goals. And Tata Martino started changing the focus more to the defense. He talked about that at the end of 2017, and players talked about working on 3 in the back and the things about being more secure defensively from 2017 to 18. And you saw a team press less in 2018. Tata Martino talked about going to that line of 5, 3 center backs, 2 wing backs. If they drop, it turns into a line of 5. 3-5-2 can be a 5-3-2 very easily. He talked about not being able to press as well out of that. So last season went a little back and forth between, all right, we're going to play 4-2-3-1. We're going to get up and press a little bit more. All right, that's not working. We're not secure enough. Let's go 3-5-2. Let's not press as much. And let's have our wing backs drop a little bit more and turn into a line of 5 when they need to. That was something that evolved over last season. Those comments, and then Frank de Boer coming in day one and wanting to be more organized defensively and structuring the team that way, that's not a shock, honestly. That's why I lean a little more towards this being more cultural in terms of the differences and just different personalities clashing. Because we saw this team last year grind when they had to. We've seen them grind this year too. I think they'd love to play on the front foot. They can't play in the same way they did under Miguel Almiron because he's not here. And you don't have a player to replace him. Ezequiel Barco's not that same kind of player. Everybody had this conversation last year about, well, he dribbles too much, he does this or does that. Those things are big parts of his game. Those are very important parts of his game. They have a lot of value in his game. It's different. It's different because Almiron's not here. It's different because you have a different personality in charge, which is where I lean to the largest issue here. Being more organized defensively, I think this team was heading that way anyway. Now, the playoffs were exaggerated because it's the playoffs. It's not the regular season. It is, survive in advance, even if it's under 80 minutes. It's survive in advance. You do what you got to do. And this team did what they had to do last year in the playoffs. They got more defensive, as Tata Martino said. Michael Parkhurst said, I think that's one thing this team has learned to do better this year. Just grind games out. This is last November after winning the Eastern Conference. If you're not having a day offensively for one reason or another, you have to be able to take pride in defending and winning battles, and this year we've been able to do that. Brad Gazan said we talked about being organized, talking to each other, communicating, and ultimately being intense and getting in guys' faces and making it difficult for our opposition, whether it was NYC or Red Bulls. From the start of this playoff run, we talked about being harder to play against and tougher in all aspects of the game. We've shown that in 4 games now. That wasn't that long ago. And it's a really interesting situation right now that Atlanta's going through. Talking about defense and talking about where this team is and where they want to be and what it takes to be among the best in the league. I looked back at the last 4 years, 5 years of the league and conference winners in the regular season. I didn't get into MLS Cup because when you get into the playoff, things can adjust and teams can change a little bit, and it's not quite the same. But over a regular season, who's been the best? Last year, it was the Red Bulls. They conceded 33 goals in 34 games. Sporting Kansas City in the West, they conceded 40 goals in 34 games. Atlanta last year during the regular season conceded 44. Not that far off, but a little bit. Toronto 2017, which was the Supporters Shield record point total, they conceded 37 goals in 34 games. Portland in the West conceded 50. Red Bulls 2016 conceded 44. Dallas, your Supporters Shield winners, conceded 40. 2015, Red Bulls, they were the Supporters Shield winners. They conceded 43. Dallas 39. Go to 2014, DC, believe they were the Supporters Shield winners that year, conceded 37. Seattle conceded 50 on top of the West. There's a couple outliers with the 50-goal seasons that Portland and Seattle had, but generally it's 44 or less goals, and more typically right around 40 or less. That is winning a conference. Atlanta right now has conceded 29 through 23 games. Pretty close to that pace. There's a couple teams that are a little bit better. DC's conceded 26 in 24 games. NYC's conceded 24 in 20 games. Obviously, LAFC's conceded 23 in 22 games, and that was altered a bit by Friday night's performance. Defense is not a bad thing, and I don't think, as LAFC is showing, as Atlanta has shown in the past when they've been a good defensive team, others that I just mentioned that won conference titles, you can be a defensive team and still score goals. You can have a good, secure defense and still score goals. And Atlanta, when you look at the numbers and the production, it's not bad. 6th in chances created, 5th in the league in goals, 8th in expected goals. You'd love those numbers to be a little bit higher, but not bad at all, among the best. For me, the biggest difference is the way this team approaches defense. And this is even from last year when things changed and they got more defensive, John, because I think when you go back and look at it, last year, yes, they sat back more, and they were looking to get out on the counter. They were looking to unleash Miguel Almiron in space. All that's true. But they drew, I think, a clear line of confrontation, and when teams came to that point, they stepped to them. They weren't high pressing at all. But when teams came into that zone, and whether it was 10 yards inside the other team's half, whether it was midfield, whether it was even a little bit deeper at some points, when that line was crossed, it was step and confront the ball. The numbers that jump out to me this season are not the offensive numbers. They're not the defensive production numbers. They are last in tackles, 20th in interceptions, 23rd in fouls committed. The team is not so much that they're putting too many numbers behind the ball. They're more passive defensively. They're not as confrontational. And that's something that I think gets back to somebody like LGP who wants to be confrontational. Franco Escobar wants to be confrontational. They want to be more aggressive. You have to find that balance between being organized and playing to your personality. And these are combative guys. When you're bottom in tackles, 20th in interceptions, 23rd in fouls committed, just defensive actions like that, that's the biggest change, I think.
The word that stuck out to me when you were breaking down things defensively was when you went back to the Tata Martino quote from November 2018, and it was the word practical performance. And because of all of these factors that have contributed to this season to date, at least I think from my perspective, practical performance almost differs from match to match because of things you have, people you don't have, getting adjusted to what you're seeing in and around you. And for me, I am having to take this season on a case-by-case basis. I'm having to take it game by game with personnel and what's it going to look like. And because of the depth that the roster has and because of the health issues that leave folks out for periods of time, for me, it's a game-by-game, case-by-case basis. And how is it that you can approach this particular match? And the points that you're making about personalities and wanting to do things a certain way, for me, that hits home in all of this discussion as that other factor that we're looking at as to why we're seeing things the way that they are. When you have players who are raised a certain way, raised to play a certain way, and do certain things out on the pitch, and then you have all of these different elements that have come into this to create this mix that we see, yes, I can understand the frustration that's there. And really right now, this is a season where you're having folks having to reorient ways of thinking. And I know it's counter programming to what they're used to seeing, but sometimes it is something as simple as a formation change that helps you grind through results. But then having to juggle personnel and adding all these different things. I mean, for me, this is a season where I've really had to put on my thinking cap and treat things case by case basis, game by game basis, understanding the context of what's going on with everything that's going on added to what is possibly happening on the pitch with the opponent that's coming into town. And it's one of the most mentally challenging seasons in looking at something in all of the years that I've had to cover because of all of these different external factors. And what you're saying is hitting home for me in trying to understand what's going on and why things are being put into certain context and explaining them out to be a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to a break here in just a second. We'll get into the Twitters because I'm sure there's lots of thoughts. But when you have a new person come in, they're going to have a different way of doing things. That's going to create friction, whether the player is the new person coming into a team in a new country or managers coming into a new group with an existing group of players. That's why sometimes you see when players leave their home country, sometimes it takes time to adjust. Sometimes they don't adjust. Sometimes they do adjust. But it's not always overnight because of different personalities, because of different ways of thinking about the game.
Right.
I also feel like this has gotten more complicated this year because of the injuries that we've talked about. So it's been hard to build that continuity among a group defensively to where they're comfortable being more aggressive because it's a different person next to them all the time. Yep. And they've had to change shape at different points. And the time where I felt like they were their best this season was that run of games where they had continuity. And it was one player switching game to game. And there were a lot of games in a short period of time, and it did eventually catch up to them. But when you were able to play a consistent group, I think things looked better. I think things looked more intense, and I think people were more aggressive because they knew what they had around them because they had played a lot of games together. I think against LAFC, the fact that this is game 2 with Escobar as a center back, it was first game with Mo Adams as a wing back. Before that, it had been Merrim and Pereira, who you're still a little like, wait a minute, they're not defenders. I'm going to have to be playing a little differently here if I'm Leandro Gonzalez-Pirez because I don't have a true wing back on my left side. And I think it showed, even with Mo Adams, who's a defensive midfielder, it showed. It showed against LAFC. He wasn't comfortable. And that's, to me, not as much to do with a manager wanting him to defend more. It's more about how complicated it's been to build this season and get past this stuff and get past the changes in style and get to a point where people are comfortable, and then you can get back to, okay, yeah, we're going to defend, we're going to be organized, and we're not going to give up easy goals. We're not going to get caught out on breaks. But when people get in our zones, when people break our line of confrontation, when it's time to step, we're going to be aggressive and we're going to be intense and we're going to get stuck into a tackle and we're going to jump into a passing lane because we know what's around us and we can be more aggressive defensively. They've had to be on their heels too much defensively. That's something that Frank de Boer is going to have to manage. If that's by design, that's going to be difficult to deal with because of the player personalities that you have. If that's by the fact that you just have not had a consistent group together playing on a regular basis, you're going to have to figure that out. Because the personality of this group is to be more aggressive. You can do that in a controlled way, as we saw in the postseason last year. But you have to find that balance between the two, and that's where it gets tricky. So Let's take a break here. Let's get into the Twitters right after this. So if you have thoughts on a Tuesday, use the hashtag Tuesday Thoughts and tweet at us at SoccerDownHere. We'll be right back.
Looking for future leaders we can trust and believe in? Look no further than the high school student athletes right here in Georgia. High school sports teach young people how to be effective leaders. It begins by making their grades and being on time for practice. It includes learning to listen, following directions, accepting responsibility, being a good role model. And it's about respect for officials, opponents, the rules, and each other. The result? It transcends sports. It gives us hope for the future. High school sports. There's so much more than just a game. This message presented by the Georgia High School Association and the Georgia Athletic Directors Association.
Today's show is presented by Appolinsky & Associates, personal injury lawyers with over 30 years of experience, supporters of Atlanta United, Faction, and Inter-Atlanta Youth Football Club. If you've been hurt in a wreck, contact Steve today at steve@aa-legal.com or call in 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
We know that every driver is different, and a one-size policy does not fit all. That's why Country Financial offers a variety of discounts, so you get the coverage you need and the savings you deserve. From good driver to good student, multi-policy to multi-car, we've got a discount to suit every driver. Call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871 today to see what you could save. On Facebook at Jason Wright Agency or by phone at 678-568-6871. Discounts vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Country Preferred Insurance Company, or Country Casualty Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
Welcome back. Soccer Down here, July 30th edition. It's a Tuesday Thoughts edition. There's lots of thoughts. Let's talk about the thoughts.
All right. Let's go back to Swixter after the show ended yesterday. Given the amount of parity, not parity, at least in this conversation, that exists in MLS, 77 of a possible 102 points is ridiculous. And he's referring to LAFC.
Yeah.
The next closest teams projected are Seattle and NYCFC at 59. 18 points is bordering Bayern Munich levels of domination. And this comes from a Tutel Rockman math problem where he said projected expected points based on home and away at the MLS break in the Western Conference.
Yeah, it's absurd. I mean, what they're doing this year is completely absurd. And I think Atlanta fans got a chance to see how dangerous they can be firsthand on Friday. I think you also saw how at least some glimpses of how you can make life difficult for them. And I don't think enough teams have been able to do that. I think between the Galaxy and Atlanta United, they showed a couple different ways that you can hurt LAFC. We'll see if there's teams that have the quality to do that the rest of the way, and we'll see if LAFC keeps their high standard up as well. Sometimes you see some of that drop off once you get to this point where you're 11 points clear at the top of the table right now.
At Airborne DJ, TJR. These questions about our, quote, fun, attractive, attacking style, end quote, are tiresome. The engine that ran that now plays in the Premier League. Why can't people get that?
I mean, I don't know. It's just different. I mean, for me, a possession-based style can be all of those things. It can be fun. It can be attacking. It can be creative. It can be inventive. It can be all of this. I mean, when you have a team that is where Atlanta is right now, third in successful dribbles, I love the dribbling game. I love players who can take people on 1v1 and beat them. That's exciting attacking soccer to me. You're not getting Michael Parkhurst beating players on the dribble from a center back role. You're not getting LGP doing much of that. It's the attackers who are doing that. That's a good thing. You're fifth in the league in goals. You are getting goals. I've asked it before, and I don't think we really have come to any consensus on it. For me, I think a lot of the attacking, exciting previous Atlanta United style that people refer to was two different points in the team's history. when they were pressing a lot very early in 2017 and when they were playing on the counter more in 2018. And they were getting a lot of goals in both ways. But those are different kinds of goals for me than a team that wants a lot of the ball and wants to attack and get numbers forward. I mean, I feel like you look at the D.C. game where, yes, D.C. sat back deep, but Atlanta was playing with all 10 players in D.C.'s half and playing on the edge, playing very high up in the formation to the point that they almost got caught a couple times. That's pretty attack-minded. So I don't know. I'm not sure if, honestly, it comes down more to the fact that you want goals and you want wins, and you don't really care how you get the goals, per se, as long as you're getting goals and wins together. Okay, cool. I think that's what it comes back to more than I want to see a team that plays on the counter. I want to see a team that plays wide open, which you're not, because managers aren't going to do that because they'll go insane because you're going to give up bad goals defensively that way. If you want a team that's going to press and create turnovers, like a lot of what LAFC does or like the Red Bulls do, they do it in kind of different ways, but they have effectiveness in both. I don't know. It's not going to look the same because Miguel Almiron's not here. And the one thing I kept coming back to as I looked at LAFC, they reminded me in a lot of ways of Atlanta United in the past, and not for the ways that people think. Not because, they score a bunch of goals, so they're a big attacking team. It's because they built the team around a singular figure. LAFC's built the team around Carlos Vela. Atlanta United built the original team around Miguel Almiron. It was all about getting the most out of that player. For Atlanta, you wanted Almiron in space running at teams. LAFC wants that, but they do it in a different way with Vela. Almiron would lead the press, and he would be stepping up high, and he would be chasing things down. Vela's not doing that. Vela's hanging off. What Vela does is he drops into space. Blessing and Mark Anthony Kaye come up and just eat up the ground around them. They join the press, and it becomes suffocating that way. And then when LAFC wins the ball, they play Vela. Not on the run like you would see Atlanta play Almiron, but they play to Vela and then let him run at a broken-down team. They play to his feet, let him run with the ball. Almiron, you wanted to play him into space where he's on full tilt. It's different, but both built the team from scratch around an amazing, talented player. And when you do that from scratch, it's a whole lot easier than what you're seeing right now with Atlanta United, where it's not Miguel Almiron in the 10 shirt, it's Pity Martinez. They're very different players, and the team wasn't built from scratch around Pity Martinez. And you have a new manager in place, too, who is getting his ideas across and wants the team to be more organized defensively. All of those things make it complicated. When you start from scratch, it's easier in a lot of ways.
Joe Bosch is a little tense. First, it's PT. Now LGP and Barco. Are things slowly unraveling in the locker room? I'm not overly concerned, but on the surface, this looks bad on FTB and the front office. We going to get another Carlos intervention press conference? ?
I don't know who it looks bad on, because I think some people say it looks bad on DeBoer, that players are speaking out like this. Other people say it looks bad on the players. I've seen both. You know, honestly, I think it is better for this to be spoken about out in public than be festering. I definitely agree with that. It's complicated, and I would feel more worried about losing the locker room if the team didn't show the fight that they did in the second half in LA. I would be more worried about them losing the locker room if they didn't show the fight they did in the second half against DC United at home. Those things make you feel pretty good about where this team is in terms of fight. If you lose the locker room, you don't get that. So, no, I don't think everything's chummy. Definitely not the case. And there are some things that have to get worked out for this team to hit its full potential. Obviously. I think that's abundantly clear at this point. But to say that the locker room is lost, no. You can, and how many times have we seen it, John, in all sports, where you have a group that does not like their manager, does not like their coach, but they all find a way to work together for success.
Gwen agrees.
Gwen completely agrees. Sometimes she barks at me like that. She barks at me like LGP's barking right now. It happens.
I mean, think about the Yankees teams of the past. I mean, think about the Lakers teams with Shaq and Kobe. I mean, you have all of these different examples that have come through. And, yeah, they may not like each other. They may not like the manager. But the bottom line is they all want to come away with hardware by the time the season is over. And differences are differences. But the bottom line is if you can get it all figured out in the field of play and come away with a title, titles kind of cure things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two levels to that because you bring up the Lakers and Shaq and Kobe, and it was players beefing, not so much with the coach, but that eventually broke up because it was unsustainable over a long term, and that's why I think there's two different levels here. Like, can this succeed in the short term? Yes, it can, because you have a base that they're building from. They won a championship last year. You don't lose that in a year. This team has strong personalities. They can deal with this in the short term. Long term, it's not going to work. People think things have to change from a communication standpoint. I think from just a togetherness standpoint. There's either got to be a coming together and you find common ground in the middle, which you're going to have to do in the short term, but in the long term as well. Or things are going to have to change one way or another. And that's the nature of any club, especially a big club, where you have these big expectations. You don't see the same group together year after year after year after year. It just doesn't happen. You'll see certain players to stay, but not the whole squad. And this is the end of year 3, and we've already talked about all the contracts that are going to be very tricky to deal with going forward. So this is a year where you can deal with this stuff right now and still get results and still win championships and still lift cups. But in the long term, you're not going to want to deal with this year after year. You don't want all this friction year after year after year.
Scott P. has a couple of sentences here. Says, yes, the comments were bad. Yes, they're just the latest in a series of scathing comments, but things are not as binary as so many on here want to believe. Think about this. 30 total matches, the team 16-11-3. Second in the East, reached the quarterfinals of CONCACAF Champions League, the only one to actually beat eventual champs Monterrey. Reached the semifinals and Open Cup so far, and they've done this all, and then in all caps, while literally having only one day of training together with the first choice 11. Yet things haven't been smooth this year. We lost our only right back on the first day of training, lost our starting left back after the first match. We've lost Barco, Petey, Tito, and Joseph, too. International duty or injuries. Done it all, transitioning coaches and styles. And yes, the style was always going to change since the previous style was centered on the fact Miggy was faster and better than everyone else in MLS. So Scott has a request. Give me 2 actual weeks of the full squad training together again where they can really stop patching things together, and then let's see how the squad looks and feels. But keep in mind, this isn't likely to happen this year thanks to MLS for the jacked up schedule. Correct me if I have anything wrong.
One, you're not going to get that 2 weeks. Sadly, that's not going to happen. So I hate to burst the bubble there. It's difficult. And that's a good point about the style and all of that. Because I think a lot of people jumped on comments initially about the style not changing. And it has to evolve some. And I think the biggest difference in the style, honestly, is just Miguel Almiron not here. I really think that is the biggest difference in the style. The other one is what we talked about with the defensive numbers. It's a team that is not as aggressive defensively, and it's not about positioning. It's not about this is a defensive team. Like I don't think those things are true. You're not going to be 5th in the league in goals if you're a defensive team. You can be a good defensive team and be a good attacking team and have good defensive numbers because you have so much of the ball because the other team doesn't have those opportunities, or you score goals and break them and things like that. I don't think it's necessarily possible to be a defensive team and be 5th in the league in goals. Because if you're a defensive team, the rest of it doesn't matter. You're a defensive team. You're what numbers behind the ball. You're not getting that. So the things about this team being defensive, I disagree with completely. The defensive mentality is different, And it shows up in those numbers about tackles and interception and fouls because they're not as aggressive when they defend. That's a different situation. It's not a defensive team. The way they defend is different. And they defend more from behind the ball than stepping up high. I think they have to find that line of confrontation, define it, and be consistent with it. And find the one that's comfortable for you to be able to defend responsibly. If it's midfield, might be a little bit too deep. If it's 3/4 of the way up the field, so you're not high pressing, you're not chasing everything, but they get within 10, 15 yards of midfield and you start to step, okay. Is it playing a higher line defensively on the back line? Could be. That could make you more comfortable. That could make you a little more aggressive. That might get this team back in terms of a mindset. I think those are easy tweaks. I think those are things you can find common ground on. But something that's difficult about all of that is you're not getting consistency in your defensive lineup because of injuries. You don't have George Bello in this team from day one in Costa Rica. You didn't have Franco Escobar at the beginning. You had to play 3-4-3 early because you didn't feel like you had a replacement for Escobar. You get him back. You're able to piecemeal it on the left side with Shea, with Ambrose, with Parker sometimes. It's going okay. You're playing pretty much 4-3-3 and getting good results. Well, then you get more injuries, and you lose Breck Shea, and you don't have Mikey Ambrose, and you have to go back to 3 in the back, but you go to 3-5-2 instead. Okay, that's a comfortable shape. This team's used to playing in it. All that's good. Well, you don't have a left wing back. So you've played 2 wingers at wing back and now a defensive midfielder. All those things make it more complicated in terms of setting a high, consistent line and playing in a more aggressive manner. I don't think you're going to get 2 full weeks of training, but you need to find some consistency with this group one way or another. And I keep coming back to the fact that you need George Bello in this team, and if you're not sure he's going to be able to get back, I think you need to go find a left back who can play left wing back to give you that flexibility to find it. Is it 3-5-2? Is it 3-4-3? Is it 4-3-3? Because with all the injuries, I don't know if you've been able to settle on a starting 11, on a 15-man rotation, on a singular defined shape to start matches. I don't think you're able to do any of that because of all the injuries and all the ins and outs of this lineup. You've got to try to find that now to build. And you've got to do that while you're in an Open Cup semifinal and hopefully an Open Cup final and get results in those games.
Michael Head, how much division is there between Frank DeBoer and the Latin players, as it seems that segment is airing their grievances and what can be done to repair/build the relationship? Can't we all just get along? #come on, let's just play footy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, Felipe Cardenas has written about this, from day one. It is a different culture, and it's a different mentality. It's definitely a far more European mentality, which makes sense. Frank DeBoer's from Europe, than it was under Tata Martino in terms of, I think, little things, in terms of being on time and discipline and all those types of things. That can create friction. You think to when, you had a teacher who, I can remember at different points in my school career where you have a teacher, you get used to them, and then they get sick or whatever. They're not there for an extended period of time, and you have an extended substitute come in, and they're very different. Maybe the teacher let things slide because they knew that, okay, it's just joking around, let them joke around a little bit, and then we'll get down to business. Maybe the substitute doesn't get that, and they're very strict, and it takes time. It's taken a lot more time than it should here, but it does take time. I don't know how much there is between the Latin players and Frank DeBoer. I'm not there every day. I'm not in the locker room in these moments. I don't know. But right now, you've had Pity Martinez speak. You've had LGP speak. I think Barco's comments are fine. I didn't really think much of Barco's comments. I thought they were okay. I didn't think it was a big deal. You had Joseph say some things. You haven't heard these types of things from Michael Parkhurst. He talked about wanting, when did he say back in May, about being more dynamic in the attack. That was what he said. Didn't say anything about being too defensive. Talked about they needed to be more dynamic in the attack. Haven't heard anything from, like a Darlington Nagbe along those lines. Emerson Hyman just got here. Justin Merrim got here not that long ago. So I don't know. I don't know if it's cultural and just because of that. I think you do have personalities at play here too. And I put it down a little bit more to that. I think it's just you get used to one way of doing business. It's different now, and okay, it takes some getting used to. But I think a lot of the soccer reasons are very complicated because you haven't been able to really build very much. It feels like you're putting Band-Aids on things rather than building, or putting duct tape on something rather than building in something new, and that's difficult.
Shiva, shouldn't the front office have addressed this stuff earlier so it doesn't get verbalized so publicly? Seems like LGP said there's communication, but sometimes it's not heard clearly.
I don't know what the front office is supposed to do. I mean, you're talking about the front office who's doing a lot of things. They're not in the locker room every day. I mean, I'm sure that they would rather not have these things get said in the way that they're getting said, because then we get all of this off of it. But they're not there to do it, and they're also not there to put a muzzle on their players, which has been good. I would think that most people would agree with that. The players are free to speak their mind, and they are. And if everyone is open and clear with that, and it sounds like Frank DeBoer is too, because he hasn't seemed riled up by what Pity Martinez said in Argentina. Both of them stated their case. Both of them held pretty firm to what they said and how they felt. Now, we'll see after the substitution what gets said after that. But I don't think anybody's bristled at the fact that things are being said. My bigger question is, all right, how can you make it more comfortable? Because it's not affecting performances, in my opinion, because you're seeing a team fight and scrap and claw. Look, Frank DeBoer focusing on defense didn't cause 4 goals to be given up in 12 minutes. Obviously not. And I don't think there was any quit in the team in that, because they didn't want to play that way, anything like that luckily I haven't seen anybody run with just yet. But no, I don't think this team is quitting on Frank DeBoer in any way, shape, or form.
And I would much rather there be conversations rather than sitting there and having players and or coaches and or other personnel sitting there and just having it fester and then spill over. Now, I would rather there be honest discussions, honest disclosures, whatever, as opposed to just sitting there and not saying anything and being mad about it. I would rather get out there for the chance for it to be aired as opposed to not.
So our good friend Payson Schwinn, who writes for MLSsoccer.com and DirtySouthSoccer.com and lots of places, Paysonino on Twitter said, take what you will from these numbers. 23 games in 2017. Atlanta had 35 points, 42 goals scored, 30 goals against. After 23 games in 2018, had 47 points, 48 goals for, and 26 goals against. 23 matches in 2019, Atlanta has 36 points, 38 goals for, and 29 goals against. It's not dramatic differences. The goal differential in 2018 was the biggest, and that's why you had the most points. 2017, you've got 1 more point than you had at that stage. You've scored 4 less goals, and you've conceded 1 less. And we talked about it in 2018. Some of the ways you were getting goals were very different. You were getting goals against shorthanded teams. You were getting double the number of penalties than any other team in the league when you look at the full season. I mean, you scored 12 goals off penalties in 2018. Take those out, and you're at 58 goals for the season. 12 was twice as many as the number 2 team in the league. Now, you were doing things to create those penalties, don't get me wrong, but that's a crazy number. You were getting goals late in games when they were already put away. Things like that were happening. I still keep going back to some of the things that were said in the postseason last year and going into the postseason about being more secure, being more responsible defensively, all that type of stuff. They were more defensive at that stage than anything we've seen this year. I don't think it's possible to say that they're more defensive in 2019 than they were in the playoffs in 2018. Playoffs are a little different, obviously, but that was defensive soccer looking to counter. I haven't seen anything like that this year in 2019. I've seen a team that's struggled to find continuity. Right now, you've got Joseph Martinez getting goals on a regular basis, 8 straight games, 1 away from tying his own record and Diego Valeri's record for goals in consecutive matches. You need Ezequiel Barco back in this team. You need better performances from Pity Martinez. You need Justin Merrim to continue contributing in the attack like he has been. You need Tito Villalba back in this team. And for me, over the last month, you need to get more definition in the midfield. You need to get a little more clarity in who is sitting and protecting the back line, who is stepping, because it's gotten way too flat at times with the midfield, and it's been too easy to play through that portion of the team. And that can't happen in any way you play, whether you're going to sit back and defend and play on the counter, step up and press, play kind of a neutral kind of game. You can't let people come straight down the gut. And that's what LAFC did to you. They turned you over at times to do that, but they also just came down the middle. And you can't do that. That's not going to work. So however you set up, you can't have that happen. And those are the things that keep coming out to me. Got to build the continuity and have got to clean up the middle of the field, or you're going to keep having these problems no matter how organized defensively you think you are, or you want to be, or you focus on, or any of that. It's complicated, and it's not easy. It hasn't been an easy season. But everything that Atlanta United wants to accomplish outside of the Supporters' Shield is still on the table. And I feel like the second half in LA gave you a pretty good feeling about what this team can do against an LAFC in the postseason. I think they took some lessons out of this. I think they learned some things that they can't do against them, and they learned some things that they can do to hurt them. It's an interesting conversation, and I can imagine that in Orlando today, you're going to get a lot more interesting conversation with all the national media there. Doug Robertson from the HAC is there as well. More players will be speaking at different times. Get ready. There's going to be more quotes. I can assure you that more people will have things to say, and there will be more questions about what was said yesterday. We'll keep taking your tweets. We'll get into the weekend that was in MLS. We'll also get into some nuggets from around the country and around MLS, and we'll also get into a little bit of the U.S. women's national team statement that was given by U.S. Soccer and what was said there. We'll get into all of that in hour number 2 right after this.
A ranger station.
I'd like to report a bear hug.
Okay.
I put out my campfire and Smokey Bear hugged me.
So you drowned the fire, you stirred it, drowned it again, and felt that it was cold?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's just letting you know you did good.
Bear hug from Smokey Bear. Status update.
I'm gonna let you go now. There are many ways to start a fire, but one sure way to put it out. Learn how you can do your part at SmokeyBear.com.
Sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service, Ad Council, and your state forester.
As a business owner, you know that every year brings new challenges and opportunities. The success of your business demands expertise and focus. And Country Financial can help you keep that focus by helping ensure you have the right insurance protection in place to meet your goals. Jason Wright can help you create a customized insurance plan that has coverages designed just for your business. Give Jason a call at 678-568-6871 or reach him on Facebook at Jason Wright Agency. Coverages vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
This is what matters. This is beyond X's and O's. This is the difference mutual respect makes. This is what character looks like. This is what defines us in Georgia. This is sportsmanship. School sports. It's not the outcome that matters most, but the way the games are played. This message presented by the Georgia High School Association and the Georgia Athletic Directors Association.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, contact my friend Steve Apolinsky of Apolinsky and Associates. He's been representing individuals for over 30 years throughout Georgia and Alabama. Email him at steve@aa-legal.com or call him 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
You're listening to Soccer Down Here daily on SDH Networks, a division of OSG Sports. Find us at Soccer Down Here on Facebook and Twitter. The time is now the top of the hour. Peep, y'all.
Hour number 2, SDH, July 30th edition, Tuesday Thoughts edition. There's a lot of thoughts, so we're taking the show rundown and throwing it up in the air and just going back to Twitter.
Correct. Let's see. Where would we like to go? Oh, Nathan Pugh. MLS has made it. Infighting in clubhouses. International players fussing about telling the truth and elbowing folks. Being in a playoff hunt, not good enough, so fans demanding change. Poor refereeing and useless VAR. Can't wait for the best to get slaughtered by Atletico.
Oh, I could care less about the result of the Atletico game. That just means nothing to me. Yes, all the rest of it. And that's what was so wild about Friday night's match is it felt like everything you'd get out of a match among the Big Six in England or an El Clasico in Spain. And, I mean, you had, all kinds of crazy moments. You had referee decisions that we can debate and talk about for a long time. You had some friction between players on the field of different teams, and then in the aftermath, now you're getting friction between players and their own manager, and things getting said in the media. I always go back to our friend Glenn Davis in Houston, who every time I talk to him, he's like, you got to love that there's never like a struggle for something to talk about when it comes to Atlanta United. There's never a struggle for topics. And yeah, I mean, this is maybe some of the topics you'd rather not have, or you'd rather have in a different format, or maybe something else, but there is always something to talk about with this team. It is, and that's a good thing. I mean, that's what any league, any team in the world wants, because you're front of mind. And I think there's been a little bit of a fear that, well, this is way too much, and nobody's going to want to come play in Atlanta again. No, I think that's silly. I disagree with that completely. I don't think that's the case. I think Atlanta United has established itself as a club that carries a lot of weight worldwide. I don't think you're going to have a South American player say, I don't want to play for Atlanta United because Pity Martinez said he didn't like the way Frank de Boer is talking to him. I don't think that's the case. Because for one, I mean, Frank de Boer's not going to be here forever. I don't think that's his intention. He has a 4-year contract. Does he see all of that out? We'll see. I think Frank de Boer ultimately wants to manage in Europe again. He wants to prove himself there again. Just like a lot of these players want to play in Europe and prove themselves there, because that's where the top leagues are right now. It's a fact. That's okay. So you're going to have players, managers come and go. You're going to see that. But the club itself, with their championship last year, with this fan base, with the stadium, with everything around it, has established itself as a big deal. And I don't think you're going to have, a problem recruiting talented players to come in if you're able to potentially, and it sounds like Orlando's about to get a really good winger if this comes true. Uruguayan journalist Martin Charquero wrote that out-of-contract 29-year-old central midfielder Mauricio Pereira will be joining Orlando City. He's valued at just under $8 million. He's out of contract, so if they get this is a great piece of business for Orlando. But you're talking about a player who's played in Russia for the last 6 years, came from Lanús in Argentina, scored 23 goals, 27 assists in 154 matches with Krasnodar in Russia. Valued at $8 million. He's going to choose to go to Orlando. Orlando hasn't done anything or proven anything, and they're able to get a player like that. Atlanta's proven things and shown things, and they've also shown that, hey, you can come here, and we're going to then be able to sell you to Newcastle United for the amount of money that they sold Miguel Almiron for, and whatever other deals come up down the road. I don't think any of this is going to change Atlanta United's reputation, because I think the club is establishing a reputation outside of individual players and managers. And that's what you have to do. This is all part of that growing process. But, man, there is never a let-up in things to talk about when it comes to this. And that's great. That's a good thing, because soccer's not going to grow in this country if everything is what? Vanilla, if it's boring,
average.
If it's average, if it's blah, if you just get comments like, oh, we're happy to be here, hope to help the ball club, whatever
Insert
else.
cliche here.
Yes, whatever else Crash Davis told Nuke Lelouch to say in Bull Durham. If that's all you get out of players and managers in this league, you're not going to get coverage. It's not going to happen. You don't want to manufacture things, but hey, when you're getting talked about like this, you don't want to run from it either. So it's an interesting time, ladies and gentlemen. It is a very interesting time with all of this. And yeah, it's not ideal in the way it's going down, but in the long-term development of Atlanta United, I don't think it's going to dent anything either.
Percy Herrera has sent notice that American Alex Mendez has signed with Ajax.
Oh, interesting move for Mendez. Ajax now with Sergino Dest, who could be breaking into the first team, and Alex Mendez. That's a good spot for these players to develop in. And I think Tafka's grand plan of Sergino Dest coming in on loan to be a backup has definitely been blown out of the water with his performances so far with the first team. It's a good thing to see. I mean, now long term, when you talk about it from an Atlanta and an MLS perspective, you want to see these players end up in Atlanta United kits first and developed and then sold. And this is something that again, Felipe Cardenas had a great piece with. He's had a couple of great pieces in terms of that development with Stephen Glass and with Tony Annan about that long-term development plan and what Atlanta's learned, and now with a guy like Bello, what they hope to see happen down the road. I mean, Bello could be one of the best left backs in the United States soccer history. He's got to get healthy. He's got to play. He's got to develop. And then what's next for him in his career, we'll have to see. But you want to see these talents come through MLS. You want to see MLS clubs develop them, sell them on, make that money like Vancouver did with Alphonso Davies, Canadian talent, but same principle. You want to see that eventually and have them go from MLS to Ajax or PSV or wherever. But this is a good thing for the long term of American soccer, because even guys who don't come through MLS do impact the American game, the American soccer business. Christian Pulisic, for example.
John Nason. The Twitterverse has given this quote-end quote mutiny legs it doesn't deserve. The team's barely 2 years old on its second ever head coach. It's not realistic to think that the Atlanta United way had been established yet. Perhaps FDB was right with spoiled. Hashtag Tuesday Thoughts.
Yeah, mutiny, definitely not the case. I think that's probably blown it out of proportion, and if people are doing that in the Twitterverse, I'm not seeing quite as much of it. Look, it's something you got to talk about. I mean, it's something that those things get said at the All-Star game, and Mike Gramaggio from Orlando Sentinel and Pro Soccer USA and MLSsoccer.com, like that comes up. You got to talk about that. You got to write about that. No question. The comments that Pity Martinez gave to Argentine Radio, got to talk about that. Some of the comments Frank de Boer said after matches, where he's been very open in answering questions after matches and what he thinks about things. Got to talk about some of those things. All that's fine. All that's completely fine. I think it's not just the Atlanta United Twitterverse that is maybe blowing this out of proportion a little bit. I think you're also getting a national media that has had a bit of an agenda when it comes to Frank de Boer from day one.
A little red meat.
Yeah, and I mean, I've said it before. I feel like it's been unfair that Frank de Boer hasn't been given a fair chance. I still think that way. And when stuff like this pops up, it just makes it even easier to fall back on. See?
Oh, yeah.
And we'll see what happens. And because
Crystal Palace.
Yeah, I mean, and there were things said there. I mean, that's what people are trying to connect those dots. I feel like they're different situations. I do. I feel like you're seeing very different performances from the teams as well. And I feel like this has been a complicated situation because of things externally from the players' control and the manager's control. Injury schedule, all of those stuff. It's been difficult. But I also feel like when this stuff happens, yeah, it's red meat. It's just, okay, cool. Here's something we can get into. And it's part of the gig. It's part of the business.
Michael had serious question. Why did the front office hire a coach that was going to implement a defense-first philosophy, a contrast to the first 2 years? Be adults and fix it. # Tuesday Thoughts.
I disagree. It's not defense first. I bristle at that because that becomes part of the conversation, and you've got national people saying that. This is not a defense-first situation. Again, I think if you're a defense-first team, you're not scoring the goals Atlanta's scoring. You're not having the performances they're having going forward. You're not creating as many chances. You're not 6th in the league in chances created. You're not 5th in the league in goals. It's not defense-first. You want to be defensively responsible? Yes. And I feel like it's been tough to do that because you've had different faces game after game after game in the back. That's a problem. They're not as aggressive defensively as I feel like they need to be. The midfield is not as defined as it needs to be lately. Those are things that are there, but I don't think it's defense first. I really don't. I don't think Frank de Boer, when you look at his Ajax teams, they were not defense first. They were not sitting back and defending and trying to find an odd goal to decide a match. It's not what Atlanta United's doing either. So I disagree with the defense-first situation completely. I think what the idea was, and I think what the idea still is for this team to build upon what Tata Martino started building towards last year, which is more control of matches through possession, through having the ball. If that makes you defensive having the ball, there's a lot of defensive teams around the world that are very successful. Just because you have the ball doesn't make you defensive. I think it does limit the chances you're going to give up. That's a good place to be. But I think the idea was to build upon that, have the ball, add some of those attacking elements that Ajax had playing out of a 4-3-3 because it suited the players you had. And I still think that when everybody is healthy, you would like to be in a 4-3-3 in this team because of the talent you have going forward. I completely think that's the case. And that was part of why Frank de Boer was a fit. So I don't think you're defense first, and I don't think you were ever intended to be defense first, and I don't think even the comments that are getting said from players talking about the focus on defense are saying that you're defense first. I disagree with that.
Tafka. Tata's warmth and approachability is probably one of the most staggeringly underrated differences between he and de Boer. I think the players have a difficulty approaching and being listened to by de Boer with these issues.
That's definitely part of it. Although I did find it really interesting when one of Felipe's articles about the culture changing and how de Boer was always around more, and he's talked about being around to talk to the players a lot, more so than Tata was. I think with Tata, and you got it a lot from comments Miguel made, that Tito made, and Joseph made, there was a lot of deferential treatment towards Tata because of what he had accomplished and what, especially like a Miguel, what Tata accomplished in Paraguay for Miguel's national team program. That made him a special figure. That's different. That's different than I think some people have thought. And yeah, Frank's a different personality completely. He's not Tata Martino. Doesn't mean he can't be successful, but yeah, that is a big difference. But he's around, it sounds like, and from some of the things that Felipe said, he's around more to have these conversations with players than Tata Martino was. I think Julian Gressel said something about that. Like, Tata wasn't around as much. It felt like they got more. They did a lot in the times that Tata was around, but he wasn't around as much. And DeBoer is around. I think LGP said something about him being in the locker room more, things like that. It's a different culture. Anytime you have these cultural shifts because of different personalities and different places you're coming from, it takes time. This is still taking time. You wish it didn't take this much time. But I think there have been complications to it as well.
Daniel Price agrees with lots of your points. Lots of growing pains. As soon as we can start building the chemistry again, we should be fine. I'm just hoping it all gets settled. Communication and understanding needs to start in the locker room and show on the pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think you build the chemistry when you get some continuity in the lineup, because the chemistry for me is among the players on the field that are seeing the most minutes, and you got to get Bello into that group. You've got to get some consistency on the back line. You've got to get that consistency from I hate to say they need to be better defensively, but they do in the midfield. That they've got to have more definition as to who's going to sit behind the other two or which two are going to sit behind the other one, however it ends up shaking out. It's not going to be easy because the Eastern Conference is very compressed. There's a lot of pressure. Yeah, you're in a good spot at the moment, but you're also 4 points out of being out of the playoffs. 5 points out of being out of the playoffs. That's pressure. That's to be expected when you're defending a title. That's why only 3 teams have ever defended a title in Major League Soccer. It's not easy, but there's not a huge margin for error, and you're going to have to figure out these things on the fly. But the more you look at it, I keep coming back to more security defensively in the midfield, more continuity defensively on the back line, and making the decision on the outside back if you have to go get one or if Bello's going to be able to contribute very soon.
Shiva. Barco said we have to trust what the manager wants. He's right. The question is, can FTB gain the trust of the players with his tactics? Seems that he's switched away from his philosophy to please what the players want. Maybe that's the reason we're giving up goals like crazy.
It could be a little bit of being in between. I mean, I think the people who have said Frank de Boer's rigid and hasn't changed anything this season are completely and utterly incorrect. I think he has listened to what the players have said, and I think he has tried to find a system and a way of playing that is more comfortable for them, for sure. I think he has. I think they've opened up a little bit more, and they're taking more risk. Well, when you take on more risk, what can happen? You can give up more goals. So where's the balance? And that's what you're going to need. I don't think it's going to be easy to find it until you fully incorporate Barco back into the team. You figure out what that's going to do for the positions, and especially where Pitty's going to play. And you figure out outside back on the left side. I think it's going to be hard to get that trust and get all of that back together until those things happen. And you kind of know, all right, this is the group we're going to roll with. This is the way we're going to play. This is how it's going to work. Because it does feel a little in between at the moment. And that can be a difficult way to play. I thought it showed in LA when you're not quite committed to a consistent plan, a consistent tactical, idea. When you are trying to adapt, it gets exposed against a team like LAFC, and it gets exposed in a pretty brutal way in a 12-minute span. Now they changed and got things done. Yeah, LAFC backed off a little bit. Sure, they had a lead. They didn't back off nearly as much as I think people want to say. The second half was pretty even. It was a good second half. It was a good second half for Atlanta, and there's a lot of things to take out of it. These conversations, They can be a distraction. They can also help bring a group together. And I'm hoping that that's what they do, and I'm hoping everybody gets back on the same page as they get ready for LA Galaxy after the All-Star game.
Allison Cupertino, along your line, I'm tired of player-coach comparisons. The divisive rhetoric from all sides isn't helping this team. The media isn't doing them any favors either. They seem to use inflammatory words on purpose. We don't know what happens in the locker room. # Tuesday Thought.
Yeah, that's something that I think is really dangerous to do. Comments like this, and LGPs are maybe the harshest, I think, in terms of just on the surface. But comments like this don't mean that there are fights in the locker room and there is friction in the locker room and this team isn't getting along and all of those types of things that people have speculated towards. The reasons I don't feel like that's the case is I feel like this team has fought hard in matches. Have they given up goals late? Yeah. They've made mistakes. They haven't quit. They didn't quit in Chicago when they could have. They didn't. They won that second half with 10 men. They were much better in the second half. And I mentioned it many times that night, and I mentioned it afterwards. Julian Gressel taking on a leadership role that night was a big, big deal. I mentioned that after the LAFC match. You needed to see more leadership on the field when things fall apart. But they didn't quit in LA. They fought back. They had chances to get a point there. The goals they gave up late, like Real Salt Lake or Toronto or Red Bulls, were not because they quit or anything. If you see a team, and John, you've seen it in all sports before, where they quit on the manager, you're not getting those types of performances late in games. You're not getting teams fighting if they're quitting on things or if there's complete and utter breakdowns in the locker room. That's just not happening.
Percy Herrera, in addition to giving us player transactional information this morning. I'm not sure why everyone's looking to being second in the East is something to hang their hat on. We very well could be last or definitely first for that matter. The East is thriving in its own mediocrity, and all it takes is someone to take the reins and run away with it.
Percy, I got to disagree a little bit here. Atlanta would not be below Toronto with the way they've played this season. To say they could be last, that's an exaggeration. I know what you're getting at. I disagree about mediocrity, too. I would say that it's... Sorry, Gwen's a little excited because there's noises.
Gwen disagrees.
Gwen completely disagrees. I would say this about the Eastern Conference. There's more parity, and it's shown for me in teams like Philadelphia that have stepped up this season, DC United, that has been a good team all year, NYC, who is showing a lot of quality now as they've gotten Hebert and Mitricha into this team. Red Bulls are your defending Supporters' Shield winners. I think it's more parity than mediocrity. I think they're beating each other up, and I think they're going to continue to beat each other up. But there is a gulf in class for me from the top 8 to the rest, for sure. And I feel like there's a gulf in class in the middle. I think New England has not shown yet, although they're working on it, that they are in the top echelon of the East. I don't think Montreal is. I don't think Toronto is. Philadelphia will make me think they are, and then they'll make me think they aren't, and kind of the same with DC. Red Bull's starting to make you question them more. I think NYC is the best team in the East right now. I think Atlanta can be there. They play NYC twice. We'll learn a lot about Atlanta in those 2 games. But I think Atlanta and the 2 New York teams are a cut above. And I feel like Philadelphia and DC and maybe New England, maybe, are in that next group that could go either way. And I think there is a step down to Montreal and Toronto. I think they're a little more flawed. So I don't think it's mediocrity. I disagree with that. Just because it's compressed and it's difficult, I don't think it's mediocre.
Okay. Katie Weaver. Can some shaky defense be attributed to Parkey not playing regularly? I know he can't play every game and has lost a bit physically, but few read the game better or organize. Also, Remedi hasn't been as much of a Toro this season. Is it him or different tactics? # Tuesday Thoughts.
It's different in the back without Parkhurst. I mean, Parkhurst was more of the organizer, the daddy, as LGP said earlier this year. You don't have that. And Robinson, I think, has done a very good job. I think LGP's had some up and down performances. He's been great in some matches, and he's had some errors in others. That's shown a little bit more. I think you've seen more up and down play from LGP, from Remedi, than you saw in previous years. The lack of Parkhurst I don't know if Parkhurst at this stage is the answer to fixing everything. I don't know how you do it unless you do something that we talked about maybe could happen against LAFC, where you move Escobar over to the left wing back and bring on Parkhurst in the back line to play the three in the back with Gressel on the right and Escobar on the left. You could do something like that. I think Parkhurst needs a little more cover now than ever before, and you're not going to play him over LGP or Robinson. So it's a little more complicated in that way. But yeah, you need someone to step up and organize. You need someone to control the team on the field in that way. And I go back to something Joseph Martinez said in an article over at ESPN yesterday, where he gave interviews at All-Star as well. And Jeff Carlisle of ESPN had this quote at the end and said, on the field, this is from Joseph, on the field, you are the players, so you have to do the best you can, in brackets. It's not what we do, in brackets, in the formation. It doesn't matter if we play like this or like this. You're on the field. You are the leader, talking about the group. That was something that it felt like wasn't there when things got bad in LA. It wasn't there early when things got bad against Chicago, although the red card kind of nullified a lot of that. It hasn't been there in some of those moments this season. It wasn't there in Monterey at the end, for example. That is where you're missing Parkhurst, more than from a on the field, in the formation perspective this year. I think that Parkhurst wasn't a get-in-your-face kind of leader, but I think he kept the focus and kept the organization together really well. Right now, you don't really have that. You don't have the in-your-face leader to do that either. And in some of these moments, the team's coming up lacking. And that's something that needs to get addressed. And that's more of a player's thing for me. That's more of a group dynamic thing for me than a tactical perspective. I mean, when things are falling apart against LAFC and they're coming down the middle of the field against three central midfielders, that's not tactics. I don't think there's anything tactical that broke down there. They're just marching down the middle of the field, and you've got to deal with that. And when you're on the ropes, you've got to deal with that so they can't find a third goal or a fourth one. Those are things from the group of players on the field that have to change. I think the tactics, yeah, and this is something that we've talked about all year. We just talked about it. Like, you've seen some adaptation to trying to make the group more comfortable, trying to get more numbers forward. All those sorts of things have happened all season long. You need to continue to do that. But there's moments in games that are not tactical where there's breakdowns. Missing Parkhurst affects it, but I don't know how you force him into the team right now. If you're going to stay in the 3-5-2, you could, and move Escobar over to a left wing-back role. That would make you, I think, a little more secure defensively. That can work. But you're going to get into questions in the 3-5-2 because, okay, if you do that, then how do you fit Barco, Pitti, Merrim, Pereira, Villalba, Vasquez into the team? How do you make all of that work? Because there's just not enough room. So then if you go to 4-3-3, how do you find a way to make it work? These are the things that, because of all the injuries and because of all the ins and outs of the lineup, you're not really any further to answering them. You definitely like to be at this stage, but you're not. And you're going to have to figure that stuff out quickly as you get into the stretch run. Let's take a quick break here, and we'll get into some of the other things going on. We'll come back and finish up with Twitter as well, but we'll get into some of the other things going on we wanted to touch on this morning as well. Be right back after this.
Looking for future leaders we can trust and believe in? Look no further than the high school student athletes right here in Georgia. High school sports teach young people how to be effective leaders. It begins by making their grades and being on time for practice. It includes learning to listen, following directions, accepting responsibility, being a good role model. And it's about respect for officials, opponents, the rules, and each other. The result? It transcends sports. It gives us hope for the future. High school sports. There's so much more than just a game. This message presented by the Georgia High School Association and the Georgia Athletic Directors Association.
Today's show is presented by Apple-Linsky & Associates, personal injury lawyers with over 30 years of experience, supporters of Atlanta United, Faction, and Inter-Atlanta Youth Football Club. If you've been hurt in a wreck, contact Steve today at steve@aa-legal.com or call in 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
We know that every driver is different, and a one-size policy does not fit all. That's why Country Financial offers a variety of discounts, so you get the coverage you need and the savings you deserve. From good driver to good student, multi-policy to multi-car, we've got a discount to suit every driver. Call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871 today to see what you could save. On Facebook at Jason Wright Agency or by phone at 678-568-6871. Discounts vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Country Preferred Insurance Company, or Country Casualty Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
Welcome back. Soccer Down here, July 30th, Tuesday Thoughts edition. Lots of thoughts. I think we have a couple more thoughts on Twitter before we move on to some other subjects.
Well, one from Daniel Price. With all this drama going on, it just makes me think a few things. Congratulations. We're a mainstream sports team, and we're entitled to all the drama that comes with it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We've seen this many, many times in all of the American sports. So, in some ways, it's good that you're getting all this because it's something that is easy for any sports personality, any sports media person to understand because we've seen it before.
Now, the change of topic. Percy Herrera. I'm going to need everyone smarter than me to explain this. And it's in reference to the numbers that were released by Carlos Cordero having to do with challenging the women's national team. Is the difference FIFA money? Is it because the men didn't play in the last World Cup? If you open the article, it links to Carlos Cordero's tweets presenting the information. Referencing Clay Travis talking about it at Outkick.
It's complicated. And that's something that we've mentioned multiple times when it comes down to this discussion. It is not nearly as basic as some people would lead you to believe. It is definitely not nearly as basic as Clay Travis would lead you to believe, or other outlets that are, you could say, skewed in what they want you to think. It's not nearly as basic as U.S. Soccer would lead you to believe, because they have a horse in this, and they are going to be in at least an arbitration fight, if not a legal fight very soon, on this. It's not as basic as the U.S. Women's National Team Players Association would lead you to believe, because they're going to be involved in that arbitration and legal fight if it gets to that. There are agendas. There are lots of agendas. And that's going to continue to come out in all of this. One of the major reasons it's complicated is because you're talking about two very, very different collective bargaining agreements. Unbelievably different. It is as close to comparing apples and oranges as you're going to find. The U.S. men, for example, do not receive a salary from U.S. Soccer. The U.S. women do. Also, the U.S. women's participation in the NWSL is subsidized by U.S. Soccer. There's also things like health care and other things that are factored into it. And then that makes it complicated on another level, because that creates a far more defined player pool on the women's side than you have on the men's side, because you have players under salary. U.S. Soccer obviously doesn't want to have a player under salary that is not getting called up for the women's national team, because why would they have that player under salary? So that affects Jill Ellis's roster decisions. That affects players breaking into that pool. Also, the NWSL needs that subsidy. The NWSL needs that support to get these players in the league, to take some of these salaries off their books. The NWSL needs that to survive. That's been a critical difference in the NWSL versus WPS and the WUSA, previous women's professional leagues. U.S. Soccer, and a lot of people would have argued this, U.S. Soccer did things to help MLS in the early days. They didn't subsidize this type of stuff, but did they do things to make it more difficult for other leagues to be Division I? They did. There wasn't another league that could be Division I, but that's beside the point for some, the pro-rel tinfoil hat folks. But yes, they did. They made it difficult to be Division I because they were trying to help Major League Soccer succeed. Why would U.S. Soccer do that? Why would U.S. Soccer want to see MLS succeed and NWSL succeed? Because when you have thriving domestic professional leagues, you're going to develop better players. You're going to have better players. You're going to develop better players. You're going to have a better national team. Those things go hand in hand. So yes, U.S. Soccer, in my opinion, does have a mandate to help the NWSL, and this is the way they've decided to do it. So you're comparing two collective bargaining agreements between the two that are just so different. It's just not even the same thing. That makes it hard to compare. That trade-off, and I was not in the room as the collective bargaining agreement was being negotiated by the USWNT PA, the Women's National Team Player Association.
You were not in the room?
No, don't be silly. This is serious. We don't know what trade-offs were made. But yes, it is a fact that the women get paid less in bonuses. And some of it is the FIFA money part of it. Yes, in terms of what the U.S. men would earn if they won the World Cup versus what the U.S. women would earn if they won the World Cup is very different, because the FIFA money is completely separate. It's also far less likely that the men are going to win the World Cup than the women. That's a fact. I think everyone can agree with that. But when you look at the full maximum, of course, the bonuses are different in that way. But that doesn't affect the money paid out by the Federation. The Federation pays the women less in terms of bonus money on friendly wins, less on per diems, less on a lot of things that I feel like they just shouldn't. Another thing that comes into this in terms of the revenue is, and this is something U.S. Soccer said. They said the men's team generates more revenue. The women's team generated $101.3 million over the course of 238 games between 2009 and 2019, while the men generated $185.7 million over 191 games between 2009 and 2019. I'd love to know how that broke out, because in recent years that has not been the case, according to numbers that have been out there. If you go back over a decade, I'd love to know how that breaks out. It's very hard to break out sponsorship money that comes in between the two because it's all negotiated as a package. It's hard to break out TV money, all these sorts of things, because it's all a package of the men, the women, all of it. U.S. Soccer, it's obviously in their best interest to put these numbers out there to make their case. Are they true? Hopefully, because they're going to get really called out if they're not. Are they slanted? Yeah. Just like the numbers on the women's side are going to be slanted too. It's complicated because of the salary structure. And that's what it's going to come back to. And that's the elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about. The U.S. Women and the Players Association made a trade-off in terms of having secured salaries because they don't have that at the club level like the men do. MLS, not even getting into players who play overseas, MLS, national team players are going to make more than national team players would in the women's game if there was no salary associated from U.S. Soccer. That's a fact. For the women to be where they have been and won back-to-back World Cups, they need security to be able to do that. They should not be trying to go find a part-time job so they can be among the best players in the world. And that could have been the case if you don't have the NWSL and you don't have the support from the federation. They're not winning back-to-back World Cups. I just don't think it's happening. So they made a trade-off. And 25 players, I believe 25 is the magic number, getting paid a subsidy from U.S. Soccer and a subsidy on their NWSL salary. The men don't need that because they're making that at the club level. That is going to make this a very complicated, difficult discussion. Because should the women get that on top of getting the same bonus structure, camp structure, per diem structure, all those things, should that be an investment by U.S. Soccer in the women's game to help it grow because it needs it? Should that be accounted for when other numbers are discussed? That's why this is not a simple, easy, men make X, women make X. It's equal. That's why this is so complicated. That's why this is going to be a protracted legal fight, I think.
And the one thing that I would recommend for everyone is don't just lock yourself into one source when it comes to your information in dealing with both sides of this issue, because they're going to put out information, as everyone does, when it comes to legal fights, protracted or otherwise. You're going to put out information that you think is going to benefit your cause in both a legal standing and in that of public opinion. So don't just lock yourself into one idea of where you're going to get your information from. Because a lot of folks, I mean, Cordero puts out 10 years of information, but where does the math come from? And that's the one question that I think that everyone should answer for both sides in all of this, in any kind of discussion. Where are they getting their information? How are they putting their math out there? How are they trying to best represent their point of view in all of this stuff? And this is a topic that we knew coming into this morning, we knew it was going to have to be discussed, and it has a bunch of layers. And it's not just something that can be glossed over in a 30-second soundbite. But I would just once again recommend, don't just tie yourself down to one outlet when it comes to getting information when you're researching this and when you're getting information about it, because you're going to get, this was the first round of information. You're going to get more pieces of information. It's going to come out in trickles. It's going to come out sometimes in torrents, and just be prepared for it, but research it all the way through and understand where both sides are going to be coming from when this thing hits the courts.
So this is a statement from a spokesperson for Molly Levinson, who is a spokeswoman for the players in matters involving the lawsuit. A couple of highlights from it. I'm not going to get into the bluster. I want to get into the meat and potatoes of it a bit. So, according to Levinson, the USSF has repeatedly admitted that it does not pay the women equally and that it does not believe the women even deserve to be paid equally. This is why they use words like fair and equitable, not equal, in describing pay. The numbers USSF uses are utterly false, which, among other things, inappropriately include the NWSL salaries of the players to inflate the women's players' compensation. That's going to be a very interesting point in all of this, because yes, it's not their pay for national team duties. I think U.S. Soccer will consider it part of their pay for national team duties. The U.S. Women's National Team PA will not. That's going to be a very important point. Levinson says, the fact is the women's team requested the same compensation structure as the men have, so they would be paid equally for equal performance. USSF refused, offering lower compensation in every category for the women's team in a pay-for-performance structure. That is patently unequal pay. The question for me in that statement would be, did they request the same compensation structure plus salary, or did they say, we don't want salary, we want the same compensation structure? Because that's a critical difference. The salary and benefits versus the men not having that is a very critical part of this. And it's going to keep coming up. And it should, because it makes this complicated. Levinson said, here is what they cannot deny. For every game a man plays on the men's national team, he makes a higher base salary payment than a woman on the WNT. For every comparable win or tie, his bonus is higher. That is the very definition of gender discrimination. The salary part's going to be what is the hang-up. And that's what's important here for me, because the fact that this has become a political fight and it's become a situation where Clay Travis, of all people, is chiming in on it.
Yeah.
None of that has anything to do with it. Yeah, it's about equal pay, and I don't know why that upsets people, but it does, I guess. There's a completely structural difference between the CBAs, and that has to be discussed. And the more bluster you get, the harder it is going to be to discuss these things. I feel like U.S. Soccer needs to support the NWSL because there needs to be a professional women's league in this country for the women's game to continue to develop. U.S. Soccer has the ability to support it. They should. How should they support it? Different conversation. I think they should. They don't need to support MLS. MLS is doing okay on its own. Although, do they support things that MLS does? Yeah, obviously. There are things that U.S. Soccer does to help MLS, just like it does to help USL and whatever other league it sanctions. I think NWSL needs the support to survive. The salary part is going to be a very interesting conversation, and that's what this revolves around for me. I think the bluster about equal pay and all of this stuff is going to get in the way of figuring out, okay, how can U.S. Soccer bridge the gap to where these players can lead comfortable lives and be high-level professional athletes and represent the country and represent the women's national team well? How can they do all this and find, I hate that fair and equitable now has become a bad word because it's not equal pay, but if there's a structural difference in salary, it's going to be hard to be truly equal. That's just how it is. So how is this going to look? I don't know. The solution that I'm honestly thinking is going to happen, because if you're, and our lawyer friends can probably help us with this one, the easiest way to make it equal and the same is to make it equal and the same.
Yeah.
You're going to do one of two things. You're either going to make it the same as the women's CBA is, or you're going to make it the same as the men's CBA is. And that's just how it's going to be for both. I mean, that would seem to be the solution. So either the men are going to get a salary, which they weren't getting before, and have a smaller player pool, which I don't think anybody wants, or the women are going to give up that salary, and USSF is going to have to figure out if they're going to support NWSL and how they're going to do it as a completely separate component of this. And they're going to have to give that up but then make more on the per game and the per diem and all those types of things. That's why this is complicated. And that's why all the yelling back and forth about things just distracts from that. That's what has to be solved.
For me, I'm looking at the NWSL right now, and consistently on the show, we've talked about the desire for proactive behavior when it comes to trying to gain momentum for the league, solidifying the league in its place, have it continue to grow, take those next steps, adding more solid ownership, adding franchises, all this kind of stuff. But right now, without the support of the USSF, you wonder what could happen. And frankly, I don't want to think about what could happen. But
the league isn't still alive if U.S. Soccer hasn't supported it. I think that is a pretty safe statement to make.
Yeah. And I think that at this moment in time, with the NWSL, we've seen crowds increase. We've seen sellout crowds in multiple places. Now it's about how do you capitalize on the momentum that has been created off of the world stage. And having a lawsuit off of the heels of all of this momentum, it endangers things. And you would like to think that both sides would be in a desire to focus on the future, knowing how important it is. And bluster turns people off. And I think that what needs to be done, and once again, I'm going to sound incredibly Pollyanna-ish here, is just like lock it down, focus on what you need to focus on, because there's more at play here than just winning a lawsuit. It's the future of the game. And you're hoping that both sides can figure out what needs to be done so the whole thing can continue to grow and take its next steps. Being fair and equitable about things is where I would like to see it, for the sake of the game, for the growth of the game, for the continuation of the development of the talent that is here, can be here, and should be here long term. Yes, it's complicated. You just want a solution to make sure that everything can continue to go forward, because if you stub your toe on something like this, that's a hell of a table leg to stub your toe on. And you don't want to continue to rebuild things over and over and over again when you're at such a critical point.
Couple more things from me on it. U.S. Soccer needs to be careful on how they handle this, because now the women's national team is far more popular than the men. And it's a better product for them to go sell. And doing things to potentially damage that at the moment would be stupid. Would just be flat out stupid. People are far more likely to buy a ticket on the women's celebration tour for winning the World Cup than they would to pay for a CONCACAF Nations League match.
And buy their gear.
All of it. I mean, it's just all across the board. So be careful about changing that narrative publicly. U.S. Soccer has to be smart about that. A couple of things here. U.S. Soccer, and this is from the ESPN piece that Graham Hayes wrote for ESPNW.com. U.S. Soccer contends that it should not be held responsible for the inequity in FIFA prize money. I completely agree with that. That's outside their control. Cordero says that he's continuing to push for increased prize compensation on the women's side. Good. That part's outside of it. To me, that's a separate issue entirely. The men have not won the World Cup, so they have not won that prize money that they would win if they did. They haven't won it. The women have won the Women's World Cup, and they've received that prize money. So that's outside of U.S. Soccer's control. Couple other things from the U.S. Soccer statement. I believe it was listed as a clarification was the way they framed it. broadcasting and sponsorship revenue doesn't differentiate because everything's done together. U.S. Soccer pointed to ticket revenues as evidence in its favor. And again, they went from 2009 to 2019. Wall Street Journal reported last month that the women's game produced more total revenue than men's games in the 3 years after the U.S. won the 2015 Women's World Cup. You do have to counter that a little bit with you're talking about a team coming off of a World Cup title versus a team that did not qualify for a World Cup. And the women are able to play more friendlies. That happens because of the way the schedules work out. The women play more friendlies. They do have a chance to bring in more revenue. They also have a chance to have more increased expenses, and that was something that U.S. Soccer said was that the women's game produced a net loss on these games, ticket sales minus expenses, over that 10-year period. The men lost in terms of the games, and I'd have to dig in a little bit deeper. Are these just friendlies? Are they all games? How does it work? The men lost $3.1 million over the $10 million in ticket sales minus expenses. This is not factoring in sponsorships, TV revenues, all the other, which is a bigger chunk. The women lost $27.5 million, according to U.S. Soccer, in that 10-year period. Now, this is where I really want people to be careful, because I've seen Clay Travis and others that are definitely with an agenda. I think it's hard to argue that. Say that, the U.S. women lost money. They didn't make money over that span of time. No, that's not true. These are on games. These are on games, on events. That's not factoring in sponsorship. That's not factoring in other revenue sources like prize money. That's not factoring in any of that. This is on events that are conducted. So, no, the women did not lose money. U.S. Soccer's sitting on a surplus of money, and that's not just because of the men. So, again, be careful with just reading a headline and not getting into the details. It all comes back to the fact that you're going to have to figure out the differences between salary and non-salary, and you're going to have to come to some common ground there. And you're also going to have to weigh in the fact that U.S. Soccer needs to support the NWSL, and does that come at the expense of the rest of this? Is it just to support the U.S. women's national team players that are playing in NWSL? Do you want them playing in the league, or do you want them to go play in Europe? That's where it gets complicated. So I hope everyone can get past all of the nonsense and yelling and stomping of feet, and the people who are going to make this decision can get in a room and sort it out soon. Because the longer it goes, and when you get Hope Solo wanting to be part of it, and she says she wants to be part of it because she doesn't want the players to cave, oh boy, it's just going to keep getting more complicated and uglier and damage the brand of the U.S. women's national team, which is a very good brand for U.S. Soccer right now. And it's going to make all of this divisiveness even worse. It's got to stop, and these groups have to get in the same room and sort it out.
On the Twitters, we actually have, Tafka has chimed in on this particular part of the discussion. And we do have folks who are also discussing Atlanta United.
Cool, we'll finish up with all this.
Tafka says that the men's national team will never go to a salary structure because the talent pool is far too fluid and expansive if it comes to making a change, cutting the salary and giving the exact same bonus/compensation structure to the women's national team that the men currently have. And it's a bit of a change, so of course I just had to click on it knowing that it was what it was. He says the big question is, what will the court do with the USSF investment and subsidy of the NWSL? And if this gets really heated, will the Soccer Federation withdraw that support and jeopardize the league? It would not shock me if they did that.
That's my concern, is that this gets backed into a corner where it is, well, we can't do the salaries and support the league and pay the same of everything else, so we're going to drop that and we're going to give you the exact same CBA that the men have. And that would, I think, be a bad thing for the women's game. I do. because I think the support of the league is very important, and I think it's helped the national team program, and I think it's critical to helping grow the national team program down the road. Where can you find some common ground on this? That's going to be just an absolute necessity. Now, the women's game and the women's league is in a far better place now than it was in 2009, for example. If you want to go back into the numbers of U.S. soccer, you were on league number 2 that only lasted 3 years, and then you didn't have a league for a couple of years, and then you have the NWSL emerge, and U.S. soccer invested in it from day one to allow it to grow. Can it stand on its own right now? I don't know. I'm not sure. I hope so. It needs to. It's going to need to eventually. I hope it can, and I hope it doesn't have to at this point, because I don't want to see it jeopardized because of this fight. And that's my concern too, that it just gets to a point where, okay, we'll just match the CBAs, and there you go. And that's going to bring some difficulties on the women's side. Look, it's two different things. And the more the fight becomes about being equal, the more complicated it's going to get, to be honest, in my opinion. It's going to get more difficult because there are structural differences that need to be taken into account here that, if it is just equal on paper, will not do. And that would be a bad thing, I think, for the U.S. women's national team and for women's soccer in the United States. I hope that people can put their big boy pants on and get this sorted out, because this statement doesn't help anything. All the extra voices doesn't help anything. It's got to get solved for the good of it, or you're going to damage a very strong part of U.S. soccer, and you're going to wreck a lot of growth that has been good.
And that's my major concern in all of this. You want to finish up by going back to Atlanta United stuff?
Sure.
All right.
Another happy subject right now.
Jillian Gaffigan. They have a job to do. I hope this drama is ignored. Forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, like, you don't have to be buddy-buddy with the manager to win a championship. We've seen it many, many times. Like we said earlier, long-term, there's issues that are going to have to be resolved. Short-term, this team can still win, and this team has the talent to win, and they've got to find the common ground to be able to do it. And in my opinion, more than anything, they've got to get healthy.
Also on the board, Jorge B. Hey, guys, by the way, my wife started listening to the show, and she loves it. Well, Thank you for that. 3 separate players question FDB tactics. Is this an issue that needs to be resolved perhaps behind closed doors? A divided locker room could be a potential disaster down the road, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, ideally it does. That ship has sailed. So it's not going to get fully resolved behind closed doors, because now you're going to have statements to statements, and it's going to continue a little bit. Ultimately, yeah, you can't have a divided locker room. I don't know how divided it is, and again, for the reasons I've said, I don't think this team has quit on FDB. I don't think they have given up in matches. I don't think those things are happening. Those would be the signs of a divided locker room. And divided locker room, too, I don't think there's different factions of players that are supporting or not supporting or against one another. It feels like it's certain players who are still questioning tactics, which, if you follow the Dutch game and you followed the Dutch history in the game, is not a foreign concept for Frank de Boer and for players he's played with and managers he's played for and all those situations. It does happen really often. So how much offense is he taking? That's the part that's hard to tell. Didn't sound like he took a whole lot of offense to what Pity Martinez said to Argentine radio. We'll see after these statements what Frank says. I believe Frank is speaking to the media on Thursday.
Brian Bell. Could Jeff be the captain to help organize the defense? I know he doesn't see as many minutes in the midfield, but seems like I remember him playing on the back line sometimes.
Either way, I think if you put Parkhurst or Lorenowitz back in, you're going to have to move Escobar to the left wing back role, and that can work. I'm not against it at the moment. I'm not against it in the short term. I don't think long term it's the way to go. And this just gets back to the complicated lineup decisions that Frank is going to have the rest of the way when everyone's healthy. What are going to be your priorities in putting this team together? Is it going to be playing a defensive line of 5? And that's something that I do want to remind folks of the line of 5 that Tata Martino played last season in the playoffs. Julian Gressel was not part of that. Gressel was a central midfielder in that scenario. It was Escobar on the right side and Garza on the left. So, if you want to stick with the line of 5 that you're currently constructing with Gressel on the right, I think ultimately you want Bello on the left, but until you have him, do you want to play Escobar there? Do you want to play Merrim there? Do you want to play Pereira there? Both attacking players. Do you want to play Mo Adams there, a defensive midfielder playing out wide? What do you want to do? Because you're going to have to, if you want to get Parkhurst or Lorenowitz in, then you're moving Escobar. And I don't think you're putting him on the bench. You're not putting him in midfield. This is where it gets complicated. And this is where it's not easy. And I think they have to figure out the left side first. That's the biggest issue for me. Are you going to be lopsided and really play very aggressive 3-5-2 right now with Gressel, who can drop, although defensively it's the weaker part of his game, and a Merrim or a Pereira on the left side of it, which defensively is an even weaker part of their game? Are you going to play that right now, or are you going to bring in a Parkhurst or a Lorenowitz to the back 3 and move Escobar over to a left wing back role to get more secure defensively, but then you're going to sacrifice an attacking player to do it? I think recent months have shown you that De Boer will not do that, and he wants to get another attacking player in. And then that goes back to some of the statements about being more attack-minded. You want to be more attack-minded, and the players want to be more attack-minded. Playing Justin Merrim as a left wing back is pretty attack-minded. It's going to be a challenge when it's going to be a challenge until Bello is healthy, or you have a left-sided replacement, and it's going to be a challenge once you have that to then get together. That's the biggest issue for me with this team, besides the central midfield finding a little more definition between offense, defense.
Matt Wagner off of Percy Herrera's math earlier in the show. He says it's a real take, only 3 points from first and 4 from being below the line. Atlanta needs to, at minimum, stay on course just to stay afloat, but at best needs a run of wins to secure a spot.
Well, that's everybody, though. I mean, that's the challenge right now in the East is you don't have room to slip up, period, whether you're Toronto or you're Philadelphia. Every game has a little extra juice to it. And you look down the stretch for Atlanta, they go to Philadelphia. They have 2 matches within NYC, both home and away. They go to Montreal. They get New England at home. That's what they have against that top 8 left. So you've got 3 on the road and 2 at home against the teams you're going to be battling with. And we need to run through what they have with one another as well, what the stretch run looks like for all of them. I think by most projections, Atlanta is expected to finish anywhere in the top 4. NYC appears to be the team that's playing the best right now. They have the second best points per game in the league, and they've been in a really good run since early this season. They've only lost 3 times this year. They're the team that would appear to be the favorites in the East. Atlanta right now on points per game is 3rd. It's not going to be easy the rest of the way. A couple bad losses and you're in a really bad spot. A couple good wins and you're in a really good spot. It's narrow.
Katie Weaver with MySpace status updates.
Uh-oh.
Hashtag USWNT relationship with U.S. Soccer. It's complicated.
Yep.
Atlanta United relationship with Frank De Boer. It's complicated.
Yep.
Philadelphia Union relationship with first place. It's complicated.
Yeah, it's getting there.
Hashtag Tuesday Thoughts.
definitely getting there. Philadelphia, I can't. Every time I think I figured them out, then something happens to make it even more complicated. They're a weird team this year.
And to wrap up, Felipe. I assume we're having Thursdays with Felipe on Thursday?
Yes, that would be the plan.
I asked Frank DeBoer at his intro press conference about the team's depth. He said the depth was there, but that multiple tournaments would be a challenge, placed the onus on players staying fit. Darren Eales was more realistic. He said that the depth is still a work in progress, and Jillian Gaffigan said, and Carlos has somewhat said the same, correct?
Yeah, well, this is part of a long conversation, so there's context there that I don't have, so I can't really get too deep into it. But
right,
depth, there's a lot of teams that would trade with Atlanta for depth, but where you have that depth, that's what we've said. You're not going to be able to get all of your attacking pieces into a lineup right now. You're not. But you're struggling to find defenders to fill out a back four or back five, however you want to look at it. Some of that is down to the fact that you've had Bello out all season. He would have been your number one coming into the year. That's been pretty well established. Breck Shea was your number two. He's done for the rest of the year. Mikey Ambrose would have been your number three. He's been out for an extended period of time. It's three players on the left side. To start, you didn't have Franco Escobar for the first month of the season. That factors in. Those are challenges. You haven't had an outside back on the right side to play in a line of four. That's one piece of depth that you're lacking. You've had depth at left side, but they've all gotten hurt at the same time. There's really not much you can do about that. Some of the depth is the construction of the roster because of what you can do with MLS and what you can't do. And that's a challenge. I think having a right-sided outside back option would have to come at the expense of one of your attacking players, and that's the trade-off. Because there's just not a whole lot of room to do it. And, again, you're going to have to find somebody on a salary that fits into your cap who's going to be a depth option. Because, in my opinion, when he's playing at top form, Franco Escobar is among the best right-backs in the league. You're not getting somebody to replace him. You're getting somebody to sit behind him and play occasionally. It's not as easy to find. Usually that's an up-and-coming player, and you don't have a right back who's ready for that right now out of your academy. You don't have a right back, that you drafted. You don't have anybody there at the moment. That's the weakest spot for depth. I think you've had depth elsewhere, but on the left side and the back, you just had everybody get hurt at the same time. That you can't control. You have depth in the attack. You haven't had a replacement for Joseph Martinez because you haven't really needed it. Brandon Vasquez emerged and bumped Romario Williams from that spot. That's about what you would expect depth-wise up top. And you haven't had Tito Villalba, who could have been depth up top. But in terms of the attacking midfield, wide, number 10s, you've had a lot of depth. It's been tested this year because of the injuries and the amount of games, but you've had depth.
I believe, sir, we are officially caught up.
All right. I'm sure there will be more. There are things happening in Orlando all day, so be on the lookout. Buckle up. There should be some tweets. There should be lots of fun. Doug Robertson's down there, so if you're looking for an Atlanta perspective, he is there. I think a lot of the Pro Soccer USA crew is on the ground in Orlando as well. All of your national media is there too. The game is tomorrow. We'll get you set for that. We'll go through the weekend's action tomorrow as well. We'll talk a little fantasy possibly tomorrow. And then the rest of the week we'll start looking ahead to the weekend because it's a big game with the LA Galaxy coming up on the weekend. A shorthanded LA Galaxy. And it sounds like the Christian Pavón potential deal is now off, according to Claudio Civiello of El Show de Boca on 6:30 a.m. in Buenos Aires. What's so funny about that? That's a pretty simple name.
El Show de Boca.
It's the show of Boca Juniors. That's pretty cut and dried. Christian Pavón, according to Civiello, will not play for LA Galaxy. Galaxy have withdrawn their offer for Pavón. They were linked to a player from Independiente, and we will see if that becomes the focus for the Galaxy. And they're still going to have to sort things out with Roman Alessandrini if they do that, because they can't have 4 designated players. They already tried that once this season, and it didn't work.
Yes, they did.
And there will be other rumors. We mentioned the one with Orlando. That's if Orlando pulls that off to get a player that's valued at around $8 million who's out of contract, it's a really good piece of business. And he seems like a player that would be a good fit for them in a lot of ways, replacing what they thought Sasha Kljestan would give them as a playmaker. That's where Mauricio Pereira would fit into. He's 5'5", central midfielder, kind of tiny playmaker, but he's put up the numbers in Russia at Krasnodar. And he's a player that's highly thought of, obviously, with that kind of value and valuation from Transfermarkt. So it's going to be an interesting week in Orlando because we're also expecting some expansion updates. Don Garber will speak to the media and talk about that. I'm very curious to see if there is some real substance to the talk out of Charlotte about them jumping into this.
There have been some
photos
photos
with both feet. Well, yes, there's been photos from the press box.
Yes.
There were games there. There was an International Champions Cup there. So I'm going to take photos from a press box of a field in a stadium that we knew was sitting there with a grain of salt. But there's been a few different things said. When you start to connect the dots about what's been said and
there
chatter, could be. Well, we don't know. There could be. Because coming into these final 2 spots, it seemed all but done that it was St. Louis and Sacramento. St. Louis, everything sounds good. Sacramento's gotten really quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to want... Well, I mean, let's go through it. You got the 2 teams coming in next year in Miami and Nashville. Both have players under contract now. I don't think the wheels are going to be stopped on either one. And yes, there are stadium issues in Nashville that they're going to have to sort out because that keeps getting more complicated in the courts. But they have a place to play in the short term that they were already planning on playing for most of the first 2 years. I don't think they're stopping the run of Nashville into MLS, even though one of the people fighting this from the Save Our Fairgrounds group seemed really excited about MLS saying, well, we're not going to deal with these, I think he said, yahoos. Well, okay. I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay.
Miami's happening, obviously, when you're dropping $10 million plus on Pellegrini. That's happening. So you got those 2 coming in next year. You got Austin coming in the following year. Is Charlotte going to come in there? I don't know. Somebody's going to come in with Austin, I think. Could St. Louis do it? Yeah, possibly. I don't know where they play in the short term, and Charlotte, you know where they're going to play. I think in the short and long term. I have not heard anything different to that. Could Charlotte be on the ground ready to go for the start of the 2021 season? That's a question. We'll see. And we'll see what happens with St. Louis, and we'll see if anything else gets said about the rest of expansion around MLS. Lots of stuff coming out of Orlando. Make sure you're following all your favorites. Make sure you got your notifications on. And I'm sure there will be plenty more to talk about tomorrow on a Wall Pass Wednesday. Thanks, everybody, for chiming in. Thanks for all the really good conversation this morning. It was, I think, a good, well-rounded discussion about all of the different topics. And a lot of that's down to the questions that you guys asked and the comments you guys made. So thank you for being part of the show. Do that again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Mucho plati, y'all.
Mucho plati.